Bonjour Robert, salut mademoiselle, je m'appelle Didier, comment t'appelles-tu? Belle, mademoiselle Belle, comment allez-vous? Ça va bien? Oh, ça va très bien. Moi? How do you think I feel? Or how would you feel if you got your heart ripped out? Put it on the ground, stomp on it, put gasoline on it, set it on fire, and let the wind take the ashes away to ride that last tidal wave. I had to wear shades to watch this review, so nobody could see my tears. God damn it, woman. You destroyed my soul. You really destroyed my soul. What do you feel? What I think of your review? Of your review? The same thing that as our punk girl Lori Petty thinks of your review. That is what I think of your review of Point Break. Come on. So yes, it wasn't Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. It was the Brotherhood of Surfer Shorts. Come on. This movie is the shit, like somebody said in the chat. Come on, and Lori Petty made a great movie with no other than J-Lo. Poker House. By the way, why is this still wrapped? Oh, I think this belongs to this Burnett pile of other stuff. Yes, I put it right on this pile. But somebody who hasn't seen Speed or The Hidden, what can I expect? Nevertheless, happy birthday, Elizabeth. I will get over it, but it will take some time. Rob, live long and prosper, still bummed out. The package doesn't move. What is it with this custom stuff? Perhaps they discovered the cocaine. Sorry. Other than that, live long and prosper.
Good before. I can see it coming in. It looks good now. Oh, perhaps you can hear me? It looks like you can hear me. Can you hear me? The mic's turned on. I'm just going to assume you can. I don't know what I did, but hey. Now I'm going to leave a place for me to cut so I don't have to go back and do it. Let's start this again. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your pharaoh of physical media, your archbishop of Banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, and of course, as we all know, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, your existential Mr. Rogers. Oh, all of my, everything got screwed up. Wow, I can see there's lots of craziness, but I am your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett. This is Robservations, episode number. Well, it's a big one. Look at this, it smash cuts. This is Robservations, episode number 482, and clearly, there some craziness has happened in my system because a lot of I don't know what happened. But a lot of everything went kerflooey. It happens sometimes. It just does. But anyway, this is Robservations episode number 482. And I'm coming at you, you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. And I have to tell you, sometimes stuff happens where it was best, I think, illustrated in Alex Cox's movie Repo Man. When Lori Walters is telling Emilio Estevez's character Otto, when they're around a 50-gallon oil drum fire, and he's talking about how Lori Walters is talking about how sometimes in the universe, if somebody mentions something, and in the movie he says shrimp or plate of shrimp, suddenly it's everywhere. You hear it everywhere. It comes into your mind everywhere. Just out of nowhere, stuff happens. Crazy stuff, and he's right about that. I always thought that was interesting. I always loved the fact that they brought that up in Repo Man. So I was thinking the other day, about eroticism and horror films, and how, not just in horror films, but eroticism and horror in general. And it got me thinking about something that happened in my own life, but how when I was a kid, I was reading things that were wholly inappropriate for me. James Herbert horror novels, Graham Masterton horror novels. And not only did they have lots of graphic sex in them, but a lot of graphic deviant sex, a lot of gay sex, a lot of crazy sex. And it didn't bother me. I loved it. I loved every permutation of human sexuality. I was interested in it, and in certain science fiction novels as well. So I was reading a lot of crazy stuff. And also I had, as I've said before, I had a lot of LGBTQ friends when I was younger, and they used to call me, well, one person called me gay adjacent. And I always thought that was a badge of honor that I wore proudly. But now I'm going to tell you a story. I've told this story before on the channel, but this is kind of an interesting story. So I went to the Evergreen State College before I transferred to USC. And my junior year at Evergreen, I was in a program. I had a film program. And I had my professor was a well-regarded lesbian filmmaker of some renown in those circles. And she passed away last March, actually March of 2019. And her name was Barbara Hammer. And she has a website. If you go to barbarahammer.com, you can check out her website. And it identifies her feminist filmmaker and pioneer of queer cinema. Barbara Hammer made over 90 moving image works, as well as performances, installations, photographs, collages, and drawings. And she and I had the same birthday, May 15th, but she was born May 15th, 1939, and she passed away March 16th, 2019. And I'll read a little bit more about her. In the early 1970s, Hammer studied film at San Francisco State University. After seeing Maya Deren's film Meshes in the Afternoon, which every film student knows, she was inspired to make experimental films about her personal life. After coming out as a lesbian, she took off on a motorcycle with a Super 8 camera, and in 1974, film Dyke Tactics, a widely considered to be one of the first lesbian films. Hammer sought to deconstruct and disempower the narratives and structures that oppress women in general and lesbians in particular. From her earliest experimental work, her films are playfully and relentlessly challenging of accepted norms and taboos. In 1992, Hammer released her first feature film, Nitrate Kisses, an experimental documentary exploring the repression and marginalization of LGBT people since the First World War. It's actually a very good film. Hammer continued making specifically history-based films for a number of years, including Tender Fictions, History Lessons, My Babushka, Searching Ukrainian Identities, Resisting Paradise, and Lover, Other, exploring issues important to her own identity and to those of other artists and lesbians. When Hammer was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in 2006, she began exploring life lived with cancer in her films and performances. Her award-winning 2009 film, A Horse Is Not a Metaphor, is a celebration of her love of life despite the difficulties. In her memoir, Hammer, Making Movies Out of Sex and Life, The Feminist Press 2010, Hammer shares stories of her rich and colorful life, the development of her feminist thinking, and the joys of working against the grain. So, she was my film professor in my junior year at Evergreen, at the Evergreen State College. She did not like me. And I guess, back then, I was doing aerobics, frosting my hair, going through a very much a new romantic stage still, even though it was the later 80s, not the early 80s. So she and I didn't necessarily get along, but she never really understood I was gay adjacent, and I liked her films, and I like what she did. But I guess I personally just rubbed her the wrong way. So part of the class that we had to take was you had to give a lecture. And I spent a long time making a tape, an hour-long tape, it was VHS tape that I had edited together, of images from science fiction, fantasy, and horror cinema, starting with George Méliès's A Trip to the Moon all the way through. At this time, this was 1987, 88. And so it was an hour-long tape and showing all different kinds of things. And the only images of overt sexuality that were in this tape was the seduction scene from Tony Scott's adaptation of Whitley Strieber's novel, The Hunger, famously starring David Bowie, Catherine Deneuve, and Susan Sarandon. And it's after David Bowie's character, John Blaylock, dies, and Miriam Blaylock, who's over 2,000 years old, she seduces and bites Susan Sarandon on the arm, injecting her own blood into Susan Sarandon's, and Susan Sarandon begins the transformation into one of the undead. Now, Barbara Hammer, when the tape was played, and then I had to get up and make a speech, she stood up and was deeply offended that I had included a scene of lesbianism in the tape. She didn't care about any of the other imagery, but it was just this scene that I had, me as a white cis male, I included this scene. And, it was in chronological order. So I was taking people through different images of different things. And that the Hunger was where I wound up in terms of horror. And so there I was, standing in front of a lecture hall. There's probably, 150 people in the lecture hall, and her. And she doesn't even let me speak. She just calls me out and is really cross with me. And I said to her, I said, traditionally, science fiction, fantasy, and horror has frequently delved into human sexuality, both straight sex and also LGBTQ sex, and has been more, I think, accepting of other kinds of sexuality. And I also explained, and I said, and quite frankly, when I was growing up, the lesbian vampire genre was a thing. You had British films, you had Belgian films, you had Jean Rollin, who was French, you had French films. There was, especially out of the European tradition, there was a lot of lesbianism in vampire movies. And I understand that it was all pretty much from the male gaze, but it was definitely a part of film history. And I thought it was legitimate. And then I also said, because at the end of what you learn in The Hunger is that Miriam Blaylock, who's taken lovers of both genders, men and women, and I understand, before I get into some gender argument, in the case of what I was trying to say, is that she had taken male and female lovers throughout her life. And in the case of her, she didn't want to be alone. And so it wasn't so much, she had learned not to see gender anymore. What she was looking for was companionship. And that, I thought that was significant. And so it sort of moved, Miriam Blaylock had moved beyond the idea of gender and physicality, and was more interested in human companionship. Because that was of paramount importance to her. So Barbara, she kind of calmed down, and she's like, okay, that's interesting. What more you got for me, kid? So, I went on and lectured. The other hour was me lecturing about all the images that I picked and why I picked them. And the class seemed to be pretty satisfied with that. Now, at the time, Evergreen skewed heavily toward LGBTQ, and this is the mid-'80s. That I was there, and it was a very welcoming place. Certainly not what we saw in 2017. The school is very different now. The Evergreen was one of the incredible. I used to call it crunchy. It was a crunchy, chewy granola school. Very, very left, very liberal, but it didn't go crazy identity politics the way it did in 2017, and kids were not insane leftists when I was there. But it was very inclusive, and it was a very welcoming place. So I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking specifically about The Hunger. And interestingly enough, Jeffrey Mao, our own the chairman, wrote a letter to me out of the blue. And I think I was probably thinking about this because Jeff was talking about how he had gone to the Warner Archive sale and bought Warner Archive discs, and he had bought The Hunger. And The Hunger was put out by Warner Archive. And so he wrote me this letter today. This is today's letter. Greetings, Rob, and all Robservers. Once again, it is I, the chairman, bringing a review of Tony Scott's 1983 horror film, The Hunger, fresh from my recent purchase of the Warner Archives Blu-ray. I feel comfortable discussing things completely with spoilers because the film is fairly old and well-known in genre communities. Also, there are a lot of unanswered questions and issues open for discussion that I feel everyone who is interested should still watch the film and make up their minds. So, to begin with, the film does not have a whole lot of plot, and it's a tight 97 minutes. David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve play John and Miriam Blaylock, an apparent married couple living in a fabulous midtown New York mansion and spending their nights at gothic clubs picking up victims to sate their vampiric hunger. Along the way, the couple come to know a medical researcher named Sarah Roberts, played by Susan Sarandon. Sarah is researching the connection between sleep and longevity, and it piques the Blaylocks' interest as it seems like they are essentially immortal and might have something to contribute to and learn about from Sarah. I'm kind of not sure exactly how all the science is supposed to work, but at least with this film it appears that the vampirism on display is more biologically based and less of a Stokerian variety, without the no shadows, reflections, aversion to garlic, and other kinds of rules, although they still do have increased strength and the ability to make people see and hear things. In this scenario, it appears Miriam is the vampire queen, as she has apparently lived since ancient Egyptian times. It's unspecified how she became a vampire, just that she has been one since then, and she selects people to become her companion, and occasionally the companion to her and John. She and John appear to have been together for at least 2 centuries based on the flashbacks to the past and the costumes they wear. After Miriam seduces and converts Sarah, she tells her that she will be immortal. However, that's not the case. John undergoes rapid aging while trying to meet with Sarah initially. I'm wondering if this is the case of the vampire powers wearing off after a time. Clearly, this is something that Miriam is used to, as she knows to keep John's decaying body in a special coffin alongside all of her previous companions. It would have been interesting to see more of the science unraveled as Sarah and her team discuss their initial findings. Apparently, Miriam's blood is not human, and when mixed with Sarah's blood, a conflict between the two types of blood starts. I suppose this might be where the idea that the vampire film in general, and this film in particular, is an allegory for the HIV/AIDS epidemic. The end is where I'm kind of left scratching my head. I guess that the reason why Miriam's deceased former companions rise up and confront her is because Sarah kills herself, thus rejecting Miriam. This rejection somehow angers the dormant companions enough such that Miriam is deemed no longer worthy to be the queen. I suppose that this interpretation makes sense in that we see right before the end credits roll that Sarah is alive and well in London and has already gathered 2 companions, a boy and a girl, to her side. This might explain how Miriam became the queen herself all those millennia ago. You need to show that the queen is not so powerful that you are willing to exist in her thrall, but that you have your own free will, and your choice is to kill yourself. But in killing yourself, you actually free yourself and become more powerful. I deliberately didn't try and read any kinds of interpretations of what the end of the hunger means, so maybe I'm on the mark or not. Finally, you mentioned how the Warner Archives Blu-rays have a higher bit rate than normal. The Hunger was clocking in around 34 to 35 megabytes per second. To compare, I put in Pokemon Detective Pikachu, also from Warner's, and it was only around 20 to 21 megabytes per second, so we're talking quite a significant difference. Yes, we are, and this is something people don't normally talk about, although I notice. This is one aspect of physical media that I feel is relatively underappreciated and highlights the fact that all Blu-rays are not made the same. My hypothesis is that big studio operations try and cheap out and use higher compression to press the discs more quickly, whereas the smaller boutique labels tend to try and max out the available disc capacity. Rob, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's probably pretty true, although I really don't understand. I mean, it shouldn't take that much longer. I just think it's they have a spec that they live up to. I mean, maybe it's because it's a throwback to when they had special features, so they had to have more room on the disc. But right now, in terms of physical media, Warner Archives bit rates have always been higher. They're terrific. Their pictures are amazing. Unfortunately, I don't know if there's any way to find out what the bit rate is on a disc other than getting it from a review. You can't. That's it. And it would only be enthusiasts who would know to check the bit rate. Now, I'm going to check the bit rates on all discs out of curiosity and report back if I find any anomalies. Well, those are my thoughts on The Hunger. And I didn't mention anything about the lesbian stuff until now because, well, it's the most well-known part of the film, and I wanted to look at other aspects of the film. Thanks, and stay hungry, Jeff. Well, since I figured I wanted to talk about lesbian vampirism, I didn't want to do that without having some female voices weighing in. So quick Google search led me to an article that was on Sci-Fi Wire, and here it is. And this is it's by Fangirls. This is by Kaylee Donaldson, and it was published on June 29th, 2018, and under their Fangirls, Geek Like a Girl. So I figured I'd read this. And this is about The Hunger. Again, Kaylee Donaldson, written on Sci-Fi Wire, June 29th, 2018. The world of horror is vast, with so many films across the spectrum of budget, studio involvement, quality, availability, and above all else, pure scare-the-living-shit-out-of-you-ness. It helps to have trained professionals parse through some of the older and or lesser-known offerings, and that's where Team Fangirls comes in with Deep Cuts, our series dedicated to bringing the hidden gems of horror out of the vault and into your nightmares. Today, we're examining Tony Scott's 1980s lesbian vampire movie, The Hunger. Now, what's really interesting about this is people think about this movie, they call it a lesbian vampire movie, but I don't necessarily, it has a scene of sex between two women, but I don't think Marion Blaylock is what you would call a lesbian necessarily, because she does not, again, gender is not really her thing, it's more about companionship. But anyway, I go on. A film studies professor once told me that, when it comes to cinematic depictions of vampires, every generation got the vampire they needed. The durability of the vampirism metaphor means that it can be molded to fit any theme or idea about the world a creator has. For Bram Stoker's era, Dracula became British society's fear of the foreign, unknown, made flesh. During times of financial uncertainty and the emergence of millennial angst, who could blame people for finding solace in the indestructible sparkles of Twilight, where money, aging, and death were inconsequential because you could be pretty and live forever? The 1980s had a different set of fears. Reaganism was reaching its peak, greed was good, and AIDS had become the all-consuming epidemic that the most powerful people in the world tried to actively ignore. Other vampire films of the era and its aftermath took on the AIDS crisis in interesting ways. Abel Ferrara's The Addiction reimagines vampirism as an allegory for drug addiction, but none of them had the potency or stylistic approach of Tony Scott's debut feature, the 1983 horror drama The Hunger, starring Susan Sarandon, Catherine Deneuve, and the legendary David Bowie. The adaptation of Whitley Strieber's novel is something of a cult classic now, but its unique approach to a well-trodden genre is worthy of a deeper look. The Hunger opens with Miriam Blaylock and her companion John attending a club where Bauhaus are performing Bela Lugosi's Dead. Just in case you need a hint as to how this film approaches the classic horror genre tropes, Miriam, thousands of years old, has been with her companion since the 18th century, and the pair are impossibly glamorous and can attract anyone with a mere glance. They bring guests back home to feast, stabbing them in the neck with a small knife and feasting. That's in her ankh. Afterwards, they dispose of the corpses and return to their lives as upper-class New Yorkers, wealthy and envied, and able to spend their days in leisure and music. Vampirism, in its modern and most accepted incarnation, has always been tied to ideas of wealth. For many, the word vampire instantly elicits images of well-dressed aristocrats in extravagant castles who mingle only with the best of society. In The Hunger, that idea is given the 80s sheen, big shoulder pads and possibly elegant townhouses with minimalist interiors, and complete freedom to have anything you want. People fall at Miriam and John's feet not just because they're exceptionally attractive, although believe us, they totally are, but because they exude power and privilege. Getting everything comes naturally to them. The dream quickly begins to unravel as John develops insomnia and then starts to age dramatically in the space of a few days. The previous 200 years or so catch up with him. Miriam's promise of eternal life was true, but she forgot to mention that eternal youth would be temporary. These are the most affecting scenes in the film. It's been over 2 years since we lost David Bowie, and it still stings. And to see his character wither into an aged figure over such a short period of time is genuinely tough to stomach. Indeed, John ages more than Bowie himself seemed to, which makes it all the harder to endure as a viewer. At the time of the film's release, the news was full of stories of the increasing AIDS epidemic, often accompanied by photographs of sufferers whose appearance had drastically changed in mere months. It's tough to ignore those parallels when watching The Hunger. A beautiful, seemingly healthy libertine turns into a husk of a man before he even understands what's happening. John seeks out gerontologist Dr. Sarah Roberts, who specializes in aging and sleep. Her experiments involve rapidly aging monkeys, which she watches with a cool distance and a cigarette in hand. She's a career woman who has little investment in her own love life, and like Miriam, is always in control. John comes to her for help, but she writes him off as a doddering old man and ignores him. When she sees for herself how quickly he aged in mere hours, it's too late for her to help. Now at a level of distressing decrepitude, John asks Miriam to kill him and end his misery, but she tells him there's no end to this. As a final act of love, she carries him to the attic and places him in a coffin where he will spend the rest of time moaning for escape alongside Miriam's other ex-lovers who suffered the same fate. For a film so achingly cool and detached at times, this scene of twisted adoration is one of its most chilling moments. Miriam, who fears loneliness more than anything else, sets her sights on Sarah to be her new companion. The attraction is undeniable and the seduction is quick. Soon the pair are having very passionate sex amidst endless flowing curtains, all to the soprano duet from Lockmay. Overwrought completely. Male gazy as all hell? Yeah, basically. Sexy? Of course. It may be the most 80s thing about a film chock full of the decade's iconography. At a time where homophobia was not only rampant, but tied into the public's eyes to a terrifying disease, to see a film just go for it with two women having the best sex ever is refreshing and kind of radical. Like a lot of 80s cheese, it walks the fine line between being hot and empowering, but also kind of insulting. Very much a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Miriam herself is a tough character to sympathize with. She's powerful and hypnotically alluring, but she's also a master manipulator who's put countless people through hell without ever warning them of their inevitable fates. It's arguable whether she feels genuine remorse for what she does over and over again, because she's committed to repeating the same mistakes for eternity. Before John has even, for lack of a better term, died, she's grooming an unwitting teenage girl to be his replacement. When she is killed, she immediately decides that Sarah will be her new companion, but obviously never asks her for her input. Miriam is the ultimate bisexual seductress, so commonly found in horror and erotic cinema of the era. Usually bisexuality in such stories is coded as bad, another sign of the villain's deviance or unnatural inclinations, but here it doesn't have that implication. She isn't bad because she's bisexual, she's bad because she destroys lives and just happens to enjoy the company of both men and women. It's a key difference, one many films don't even bother with, but when you're looking for solid bisexual representation in pop culture, these things matter. During their lovemaking, Miriam feeds Sarah some of her blood, and she soon begins to transform herself. Here, vampirism is directly depicted as an infection, an invasion of the body that has no known cure. For a doctor like Sarah, this is the cruelest fate, and one that would have felt all too relevant upon the film's release. Driven mad by hunger, Sarah kills her boyfriend, then falls into Miriam's arms in a daze. It seems that she really is ready to accept the inevitable until she stabs herself and forces Miriam to ingest her blood. This transfer of bodily fluids seems to do the trick. It's one of the movie's more muddled moments, and it's never really explained, and Miriam falls to her death, suffering the aging fate her lovers went through as they watch on, having emerged from their coffins like mummies to see her turn to dust. They, too, are free from the agony once she passes. The ending is where the film falls apart. The final scene of Sarah living an eternal life with Miriam now in the coffin was added at the behest of the studio in case the film was successful enough to warrant a sequel. Whitley Strieber wrote 2 sequels, actually. It really doesn't make much sense, something Susan Sarandon has talked about openly for years following its release. We've just seen both women die, and now they switch to this. It also defangs the central question Sarah faces. Would you want to extend life if it meant living essentially as an addict? Sarah refuses this and accepts death, and that's what makes the moment so powerful. Tacking on a U-turn like the film does spoils that, and also rejects the rules it spent the previous 90 minutes establishing. When your film is mostly about mood and tension, it doesn't serve the story well to ignore that subtle world building in favor of a sequel hook climax. I actually really liked this. I thought that, for a quick take, this was a pretty excellent article, and so I want to go back and thank the author, Kaylee Donaldson, for writing it. So thank you for that, Kaylee. And again, this was on sci-fi.com, Deep Cuts the Hunger for Fangirls. Now, then, that was specifically about the hunger. And then what I was also looking for was another voice to talk about the genre of lesbian vampire films, which was incredibly popular. Hammer horror, if you know Hammer, British Hammer Studios in the 60s and the 70s, very titillating, very male gazy. There was lots of nudity and a lot of boobs in those movies, and obviously directed by some old British masters. But there was something about those films, for whatever reason, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of them. There was a lot of these lesbian vampire movies, and you're combining obviously sexuality and vampirism, and that's something that was part of the myths from the very beginning. But I found an article, and this article was written by it's a blog. Her name is Joy Robinson, and she says Joy developed a love for horror early in life, thanks to the age of VHS and a mom who raised her on Hammer, Vincent Price, and Dark Shadows. She has a special fondness for the oldies, Technicolor female-driven narratives, and lesbian vampires. She is an aunt and a cat mom. And you can go to goddessandmonsters.com for more writing and reviews. So she was writing a series. This is the second part of that series, and I figured I would delve into that. In the second part of our three-part exploration of the lesbian vampire, we examine her explosion in popularity in the 60s and 70s horror cinema. When we left off in our first installment, the lesbian vampire had largely receded into the shadows. Her first appearance on screen in 1936's Dracula's Daughter was not hugely successful in its day, and there wouldn't be another lesbian vampire on screen for almost 2 decades. She belonged to the Gothic realm, something in which much of the post-war world seems to have had little interest. But in the late 1950s and early 60s, there became a bit of a Gothic revival. In the UK, Hammer was turning out Dracula and Frankenstein films. On the continent, directors like Mario Bava were telling atmospheric tales of vengeful ghosts and the undead. In America, Roger Corman and William Castle were making popular horror once again, the province of haunted mansions and dark, stormy nights. This renaissance made icons out of actors like Vincent Price and Barbara Steele. The 1960s saw 2 adaptations of La Fanu's novella, 1960's Blood and Roses and 1964's Crypt of the Vampire. These 2 films are often overshadowed more accurately, by films of the following decade, but they are well worth watching and discussing, and they were certainly harbingers of what was to come. While Blood and Roses brings Carmilla's story to a contemporary setting, it features Gothic motifs and imagery. The film is visually beautiful, the first of the subgenre to bring dreamlike art house aesthetics to the table, long before Jess Franco and Jean Rollin. It is also perhaps one of the earliest films of any genre to display attraction between 2 women, albeit in a way that mostly exists through their mutual attraction to the same man. In this film, Carmilla has unrequited feelings for both her cousin, Leopoldo, and her best friend, Georgia, who have recently become engaged. Disappointingly, her longing for Leopoldo takes the forefront of the narrative, and her feelings for Georgia are largely expressed through a desire to get to Leopoldo through her. An explosion unearths the tomb of an ancestor whose spirit seems to possess Carmilla. It's unclear if she was truly possessed, if she's a vampire, or if she simply is delusional, but she becomes even more obsessed with possessing Georgia and claiming Leopoldo as hers. It contains few horror elements and even fewer vampire trademarks. There are no fangs and very little blood. That said, it's a stunning film with some truly remarkable dream sequences, but admittedly it ranks as one of my least favorite Carmilla adaptations, probably because it's the lightest on lesbianism. The other film from this decade, however, just happens to be my very favorite Carmilla adaptation. Even in the most in-depth discussions of lesbian vampire films, it gets a passing mention at most, if it's named at all. It's a shame because it's such a delightful film that perhaps captures the essence of the relationship between Laura and Carmilla in Le Fanu's original story better than any other. At the heart of the film is Laura, a tragic young heroine who is living under the shadow of a sinister ancestor who puts a curse on future generations of the Karnstein family. Laura's father, played by Christopher Lee, who adds an instant boost in quality to every film he's in, is afraid that Laura is unknowingly possessed by the ancestor and bringing her curse to life. While in many ways the film veers off into some bizarre territory, in others it remains very true to the source material. A carriage accident lands a beautiful but mysterious young woman named Lubja in Laura's lap, and pretty soon the 2 are spending their days frolicking in the gardens and gazing into each other's eyes. There are some highly suggestive scenes in which Laura leads Lubja, I think it's Luja? I can't pronounce I don't know what that is. Let's just call it Luja. Luba? I don't know. By the hand into her bedroom. The seduction is certainly mutual, and the lesbian subtext is so overpowering that it barely qualifies as subtext. It was enough to blow me away as a confused, closeted teenager who had never seen anything like it on screen before. Blood and Roses and Crypt of the Vampire brought Carmilla back to life, far less famously so than the film that would come next. Had they not pulled the lesbian vampire out of the shadows, the films of the 1970s may never have given her the chance to really shine. In 1970, Hammer released The Vampire Lovers, which is the first of the Karnstein vampire trilogy, and with Lust for a Vampire and Twins of Evil following. And a dozen lesbian vampire films followed in its wake. Starring the captivating Ingrid Pitt as Carmilla, the film marked a shift in narrative from the lesbian subtext of the Gothic tradition to the open sexuality and copious nudity that would come to define much of the subgenre. The Vampire Lovers is the first and arguably the best of what would be known as the Karnstein trilogy, a series of films that were increasingly loosely inspired by Le Fanu's tale. In many ways, the first film is faithful to the source material, although it adds a distinctly male perspective to the narrative by bookending Carmilla's story with those of the men who would eventually destroy her. She is positioned as a worldly, mature woman in contrast to Emma, the Laura character, who is decidedly naive, sheltered, and virginal. On the surface, their flirtation seems innocent enough, despite the viewer's knowledge of Carmilla's true nature. Like Le Fanu's character, this Carmilla also seems to develop genuine feelings for Emma. But Carmilla's plans for them to spend eternity together are thwarted, and she is eventually displaced by a bland, wholly unnecessary male hero. Carmilla is an unnatural creature both because she is a vampire and because she is a lesbian. It is worth noting that, while she does also briefly seduce the male butler, she does so only out of necessity, and she does not appear to feel the same pleasure she does in her interactions with Emma. She threatens to introduce Emma to a world where men are not in control of women's lives or necessary for their pleasure. As Barbara Creed puts it in her iconic work, The Monster is Feminine, the lesbian vampire threatens to seduce the daughters of the patriarchy away from their proper gender roles, and for these reasons, she must be destroyed. This idea would be explored differently by some of the following films. While it would be a mistake to label any of these films as feminist, few of them do bear signs of influence from second-wave feminism. Now, this is a really long article, so I'm not going to read all of it, but I wanted to get to that point because one of the things that I always thought was cool about lesbian vampire movies is that while on one hand my young self was literally titillated by what was going on, it was always apparent to me, and maybe because I was literary minded and was reading a lot of horror fiction, that even though these films were absolutely made from the male point of view, and nude girls with big boobs, very much the male gaze. But it was always apparent to me that these women, one of the things that I liked about the lesbian vampire subgenre is that the alpha woman, or the Miriam Blaylock character, the Carmilla character, they didn't need men. You know, they could, and the promise was that if these lesbian vampires were left alone, they would probably have reshaped the world in their own image. And I love the fact that, well, frankly, while they tried to give us dashing male characters to identify with, I kind of always identified with the lesbian vampires because I'm like, you know, it's too bad that they don't get away with what they want to get away with, because the men in these movies are kind of dumb. I mean, and not like they're stupid. Some were smart, like Peter Cushing was always smart, and there were other characters that were smart. But for the most part, to me, the lesbian vampire world was the future, you know, and everybody else, all the men were mired in their archaic belief systems and their anti-science bias or whatever. I mean, I always loved that. I always thought it was great, and I always was like, I want to be seduced, or at least can I be the odd third wheel in a group of in a lesbian vampire. I guess it wouldn't be a triangle, because they had no use for me. But I'm like, I want to help build. Here's the article, by the way. I put it in the live chat. I want to go help build the new lesbian vampire world order for you. I don't know. I'll learn to build houses or something, or bricklay for your castles. You know, let me be a servant for all of you. But this went on for a long time, and it really got me thinking that horror and eroticism, which were such a part of one another, it's kind of been bled out of the genre. Like even the slasher genre, teenagers would have sex and then they would get killed by the slasher. But a lot of the horror movies that we're getting, certainly kind of the Insidious movies, the Conjuring films. I mean, a lot of what is passing for horror is rather chaste. And we're not getting, I mean, even Hellraiser had a big sexual component to it. Obviously, even the Cenobites being a very evocative of hardcore S&M leather daddy dungeons or whatever. I mean, it or anyone, not even leather daddy, any dungeon, any BDSM or whatever. And all of that, we are living in a surprisingly, when it comes to horror, it's sort of sexless. I mean, even the Twilight series. The Twilight series was what it was. Sure, it came into play later because there was a pregnancy involved. But the first Twilight movie is like, okay, K-Stu or whatever, you're gonna find the ultimate perfect teen love story is finding the most beautiful boy in the world who will protect you with his life but doesn't want to fuck you. And I always thought that was such a weird, I mean, we've sort of moved in. I've seen all culture, geek culture, all of that. As we become more tolerant and we want to be more inclusive, certainly the male gaze has been bled out of all of it. But it hasn't necessarily been replaced by the female gaze. Is there one anymore? Where's the eroticism? Is it because we live in a world where Pornhub or whatever, you can find whatever pornography you want at the click of a button? What happened to eroticism? I guess people, they don't have any patience for it anymore. When you can go see hardcore pornography whenever you want, why spend time making something that's erotic? And I miss that. I like that. I liked horror and eroticism. And I do, and the 80s had a lot of that. Even in Fright Night, Jerry Dandridge, when he's going to seduce Amanda Bierce, which is kind of funny when you find out when Amanda Bierce obviously came out later, but it was great. Even that was great. And there's female filmmakers like Anna Biller who made The Love Witch. And if you haven't seen The Love Witch, you should go check it out. Who is clearly in love with all of these kinds of movies. But I miss it. I miss eroticism on screen coupled with horror and eroticism together. And I just wonder, I mean, it's there, but it's missing something. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why it's gone away. Now I can understand lesbian vampirism has, especially these movies, very much come from the male gaze. And I completely get that. But I kind of want to see a new version of this where maybe a combination of my own film professor, Barbara Hammer, and a new and up-and-coming female director would make a vampire movie where Camilla does get to run off with Linda, and they do get to live in bliss forever. What would that be? What would that be like? I want to see that movie. Maybe they've made one already, and I'm just unaware of it. But it just got me thinking. I miss it. I miss growing up, and I miss having those. Every time you watched a Hammer movie and there was a little bit of nudity, especially when I started getting copies uncut, I'm wondering, is my mom going to come down and see me seeing like a woman with boobs on the screen? I'm sure my mom wouldn't even care. I probably thought about it more than she did, but I thought about it, and there was something. It was innocent, yet not, and those two things together were a very heady concoction, and I miss those days. Maybe I'm just too old. Maybe horror and eroticism will elude me forever now. But I would love to see even erotic thrillers. I mean, they've moved. They became B movies. I mean, when's the next time someone's going to make a A-list Basic Instinct? Ever? Are they ever going to do that? Is the adult erotic thriller, was it relegated to Cinemax? What happened to A-list erotic thrillers? I don't know. I mean, look, Interview with a Vampire. Even the movie, Neil Jordan's film, obviously that's a metaphor for homosexuality, men, a love between men, but it was great. I love that. I love, Louis and Lestat. I'd watch a movie about their relationship. Too bad, Louis just didn't dig being part of the undead, but I want to see more of that. We got to bring this back. I mean, Jim Jarmusch made Only Lovers Left Alive, if you haven't seen that, with Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton. That's a very cool movie that drips with eroticism. I want to see more of that. What We Do in the Shadows. It's cool, very funny. but we got to bring the eroticism back, and I miss it. I think kids today are really lacking. They have to go from 0 to 60 all the time, when it was baby steps. The idea of stealing a glance at something that was both sexual, erotic, and horrifying at the same time. There was something fun about that growing up. And I wonder, is it still there? Or are kids just going straight to Pornhub? Which is a bummer to me. I don't know. What do you guys think? I have no idea. Anyway, that was just what I was thinking about. Now, Dieter Bastian, who you saw me open his box, he expressed discontent that I didn't read the letter that came with his box of goodness. Now, some of you might remember, he sent me a number of DVDs, and he sent me gummy bears, and he had joked, and the reason he'd made jokes about cocaine being in the package, there wasn't. He didn't send me any cocaine in the package. But I didn't realize that he sent this letter to me and my friend Dave Hargrove, and Dave Hargrove, for his birthday, I had Dieter get us Steven Soderbergh's Solaris. So I didn't realize that this letter that Dieter wrote on July 10th was addressed to the two of us. And Dave watches this show. So I figured I am going to... Oh, wait a minute. Did I put this... Yeah, I did. I put this letter. Let me put it in here again just so you don't have to search back on the live chat. So I'm going to read Dieter's letter because it's handwritten. And how often do you get a handwritten letter? And Dieter, by the way, has very legible penmanship, which I would probably expect nothing less from a German. But, so here you go. This is Dieter Bastian's letter that came in his box of goodness that I opened on Sunday. Dieter here. Rob, if you're reading this, then I have fulfilled my order from Captain Burnett to send him 2 copies of the German Blu-ray release of the movie Solaris. I hope this package arrived in good shape. Hopefully your friend Dave will not only be happy with the exterior of the disc, but with the audio-visual quality as well. Since you're always given high regards to Blu-ray releases from Deutschland, I hope this won't disappoint. By the way, I do like German Blu-rays because they have the highest QC standards in the world. But since sending you only these 2 discs would be a little lackluster in my book, why should I not also find a present for you too? Why the hell not? I just wanted to fill up your physical media archive with more stuff, specifically from Germany, because as of this writing, both gifts releases have not seen the light of day anywhere else in the world. They have not, and one of them I've been dying to see. A 4K world premiere from your new favorite German label, Turbine. Watched Bang Boom Bang yet? I'm going to. Unfortunately, I had to open it ahead of time since the Blu-ray was loose. And a newer movie just on Blu-ray, which is, I hope you haven't seen. I haven't, but I've been dying to see it. If that's the case, please stop at your IMDb or Google search for reviews about it right now and just watch it blind. A heads up, considering the cover, don't expect an exploitation fest. It would be a nice change of pace if you would consider the movie for an Elizaview show, because 1, it could be the first film none of you saw, and 2, you should blame that German doofus for choosing it. If it sucks. You know what? I will, in fact, watch that movie. I'm dying to see that movie. Where did I put the disc? It's right here. No, these are the Solaris discs that the German Blu-ray. Again, these are the Lightstorm movies that haven't been released on Blu-ray in the United States. There are 4, as I said before. There's Solaris. There's Strange Days, The Abyss, and True Lies. Those are all Lightstorm movies that have not come out domestically in any high-definition format, but you can get Solaris and Strange Days, movies that James Cameron didn't direct in Germany, so that's amazing. But what can you expect from someone who didn't get the fuzz about free enterprise? The rest of the box should be pretty much self-explanatory. Haribos, because no package from Saarbrücken to Pasadena can leave without them. More dog treats, and she told me Gilbert didn't decline them. He loved them. What about Tallulah? They both love them. And Dieter also sent me good instant coffee. Is there such a thing? Like, I'm from Seattle, and he did send me this instant coffee. So, there you go. Because let's face it, your fancy schmancy coffee would not survive the harsh and coldness of space, so you better get used to the horrible taste ahead of time before we see each other in the final frontier, wherever that may be. But to sweeten the taste, you could use the coffee mug that comes with it, but to break off a rib of one of my favorite chocolates and forget about, those chocolates you sent me are so good, and forget about how coffee might destroy your good food senses. So Rob and Dave, Let's hope the world will be getting back on track again so that we can all rock and roll all night and party every day. Goodbye, Rob, from the moment from your godfather of physical media, from mostly Germany, Deutschland, or the rest of the world. Dieter Saarbrücken, Deutschland. Well, thank you, Dieter. I appreciate that. I know I should have read that letter. I don't know why I didn't, and I profusely apologize. Anyway, now I've read it. By the way, here is another, for those of you who don't know Hammer Horror. I found an article I was going to read, but it's too long, and I'm going to put this in the live chat, and this is a remembrance of somebody. It's a remembrance of Hammer Horror. And it's a pretty good one. I liked it. So check it out. If you don't know Hammer Horror, you should. For those of you who want to know, I love the Karnstein Vampire trilogy. My favorite Hammer vampire movie is not actually a lesbian vampire movie. It's Vampire Circus. I love Vampire Circus. There's a great Blu-ray out of it. I would encourage everyone to go check out Vampire Circus because Vampire Circus rules. So check that out. Anyway, let's see. I've got more letters from people. More letters. Amazing. And so let's jump into those. Mike. Wait a second. My computer. I'm telling you. It's being crazy. It's doing crazy, crazy things. All right. So let's go back and see what we have got here. We've got a lot. I don't know where to start. Who should I start with? We'll see. Omar94. Hi, Rob. I wanted to give you, your moderators, and the viewers recommendations for movies that I like and think are underappreciated. So here goes. My first recommendation is a 1943 romance film called Mr. Lucky, starring Cary Grant. My second recommendation is a 1941 screwball comedy called The Lady Eve. That's a great film, starring Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda. My third recommendation is the 1977 Disney animated movie called The Rescuers, starring Eva Gabor. The animation looks a little cheap, but it's still quite a good movie. These are my three recommendations: Mr. Lucky, The Lady Eve, and The Rescuers. Thanks, and live long and prosper. I'm right there with you. The Lady Eve is a delightful film. Absolutely. It is great. So check that out. If you haven't already, please do so. Good choice. A very, very good choice. You know what? I've got a Willow Yang letter as well coming up, ladies and gentlemen. I love when Willow writes me letters. Emma Bannon. Emma Bannon wrote a letter. Emma's over in the UK, and she actually defended me online, so I appreciate that, Emma. So thank you for doing that. Emma says, "Hi, Rob, and all fellow imagination connoisseurs. Now that Disney owns the world, and every single franchise worth having wears the sarcastic font on this iPad, I've been wondering what they will do with the Alien series. I've come to the conclusion that since they're unlikely to go with my idea of Scrooge McDuck versus Alien, I've come to the conclusion that maybe they shouldn't do anything. Whenever people talk about the Alien series, a word I often see used is saga. And to me, Alien has never been that. It was too gritty, too much of a desperate fight for survival, and too real, well, apart from the world's most demonic baby completely ruining dinner, to be considered a sprawling saga. Indeed, I don't think it was ever meant to be. 7 years after Alien, James Cameron gifted us the more than worthy sequel Aliens, and Ripley's story was told. Her demons met and defeated. Her arc completed. There was no need for another film. And cut to a film executive steeping his fingers as little dollar signs flash up in his eyes. I know that Alien 3 has its fans, and although the infamous assembly cut was superior to the theatrical release, it was never in my mind a good film. There were too many faults with both the plot and some of the film's technical aspects, and yet, cut to a slightly more desperate and disheveled film executive staring blankly into his empty box of original ideas. Yeah, okay, Alien Resurrection. I guess the best thing I can say about that is that visually there were some very interesting things, but as with the previous entry into the saga, damn it, there was no need for it other than a cash grab, and nothing really fresh or of any substance was offered. I can't even bring myself to comment on the Alien versus Predator films other than to say that's 3.5 hours of my life I'll never get back. Prometheus promised a return to form, with Ridley Scott returning to the series for the first time since the first film. I thought Prometheus was a beautiful to look at film that had a plot where people who should have known better made really colossally stupid decisions. Really, really colossally stupid decisions. I hear that they're now writing for Star Trek Discovery. So, film looked nice, people very stupid. Lastly, we reached the nadir of the series. The nadir, I love that word. Cut to film executive being escorted out of the building. A film that didn't stick to the new direction that Prometheus had tried to go in, and yet also couldn't, for whatever reason, be the kind of alien film that most people expected. So I've taken this really long way to basically say that there only ever were 2 good alien films, and that it's been a law of diminishing returns ever since. There never was any great sprawling story that needed to be told over several movies, just a couple of good films followed by some that weren't. Of course, film companies don't make sequels out of charity, and very rarely because there's a story that needs to be told, but creatively there has to be something there that offers something new rather than a pale imitation of what's gone before. Saga? No. But 2 great films that told a story with a meaningful arc followed by 6 films that didn't. So, no more, please. The story is told. Let's not stretch it out beyond its breaking point. I have no doubt that there will be those that disagree with me, and that is great. Healthy and well-reasoned debate should never be something to be afraid of. And who knows if you're A, still awake, and B, really unlucky. I may go into more detail as to why I think that each film after Aliens was ultimately so disappointing. That from Emma Bannon. Emma, thank you very much. What a great letter, by the way. Look, I kind of feel that same way about Star Wars. There were two really, really good movies, and then after that, but I think the Star Wars movies, in retrospect, are better than the Alien films. So there you go. But yeah, I very much appreciate that letter. Thanks for that. It was great. I like the assembly cut of Alien 3, but I don't like it as a follow-up to Alien and Aliens. I mean, to me, Alien is a perfect film. Aliens is I think Alien is a perfect movie, and Aliens is a perfect sequel because it does something new and expands the mythology and does it in a very interesting way that does not in any way, shape, or form disrespect the first film, which I think is really cool. I really like that. So, yeah. I'm a big fan of Alien and Aliens, and I think you're right about that. And it's too bad. It is too bad. Let's see. Somebody's sending me a book, which is very nice. So I'm going to say thank you. S.R. Kane writes me and says, I've been a fan of yours since the Collider days. Your insight into science fiction and the fantasy genre has helped me in my aspirations of screenwriting, prose, and now narrative design for video games. I can't thank you enough for the lessons learned. Well, that's very nice of you. But what I can do is provide you with a link to my debut science fiction novel, Intertwined, available on Kindle Unlimited. Well, that's very cool. S.R. Kane, you know what? I'm going to put this in there too. Why not? I'm going to put a link in the live chat for your book, Intertwined. Now I'm curious, what does that mean? What does intertwined mean? We shall find out. And we'll find out together. I'm going to put this in here. So, here you go. Everybody, S.R. Kane's Intertwined. Here's a link. Go buy their book. I have no problem promoting other people's material. Everybody should download the book. And what a cool thing. Congratulations on writing a novel, too. That's something I aspire to do. And I don't know if I could ever do it. I don't know if I have the patience or the talent. Stubble McShave is here. Hey, Rob. A.K.A. the man of many tangents. I live in the southeast of Sweden. Emil, who often writes in and comments on things, lives approximately 120 kilometers or 75 miles south of where I live. The city where he lives was once a part of Denmark. In the middle between his location and my location is the city of Kalmar. Is it Kalmar? Where I grew up and lived my first 24 years. before February 26, 1658, when Denmark lost a lot of its territory. It was basically the biggest border castle and fortification against a possible Danish invasion. It also served as protection from the pirates in treacherous waters, and was an important part of the Hanseatic League, a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and market towns in northwestern and central Europe, which was formed in the late 1100s. Dieter probably knows about it. A few kings and queens also lived there for small periods of time during the 16th century. This made the city a scene for much drama and conflict throughout history. As a young teenager, I was very interested in the local history and archaeology. I joined different groups focusing on the local history and read a lot on my own. I won't bore you with the details, but it was the scene of many fascinating conflicts and important historical events. The castle, which started out as a fortification in the early 13th century, was under siege 38 times through history and was only conquered once by the damn Danish in the Kalmar War, which lasted from 1611 to 1613. The war was fought on many fronts, but it got its name for the long siege of the city and the castle. As I studied history in detail, I didn't focus that much on the kings and queens who had lived there or the treaty that was signed between them, between the Nordic countries, and from which an important union got its name. Instead, I focused on the local rulers before it became a seat of power and the domestic life of both the Gentile and the gentry. I had the opportunity to enter people's homes who still had standing parts of the old city wall in their basements and mapped events to places in today's very different looking city. I was also part of some reenactments efforts and got really nerdy about the whole thing. Now, why am I telling you this? The reason is, no matter how much I study the life and events of history, it never was as real to me as books, TV shows, and movies about things that never happened. I thought this was when I listened to the Treksperts episode and you talked about the not real futuristic history of Star Trek and how that was compared to many other things. I know that it's bizarre to say that something that actually happened in history feels less real than something told in a movie or a book that has never happened in real life. I think it comes down to the concept of story. All the information I read about my local history had no stories in them. It was basically just facts with some chronicles thrown in at times. When you're experiencing a story, you form a much stronger association to it. That's why it's important to tell stories through books and movies about our history. That's also why it's important to not misrepresent it too much, unless you're making a story about an already fictional character like Robin Hood. You must, of course, take some liberties to make the storytelling interesting, but the characters that are depicted were once real people, and they don't get a say in how you're presenting them to the world, even if they died hundreds of years ago. That's all I wanted to say on the subject. Thanks, Stubble. Well, Stubble, what a great letter. I mean, what Stubble refers to is that, to me, when he brings up Star Trek, I think Star Trek is, throughout the original series, the animated series, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, while there are inconsistencies, the way the Klingons look, for instance, they try and explain it. Does it work? I don't know. But there is an effort to make a unified whole. And one of the things that was one of the appealing things for Star Trek from before I was born up through 2005, which is the majority of my life, there was new Star Trek that was evolving, that was trying to illuminate this universe, illuminate this future history. And the makers of modern Star Trek, beginning in 2009 with Star Trek 09 all the way up through Discovery and Picard and now Lower Decks, they didn't care. They chose to start their own history again, and try and they want to say it's shoehorned and canonical, but it's clearly not. I mean, Star Trek Discovery and Picard are not part of my headcanon. I do not recognize them as taking place in the canonical Star Trek universe. You can say whatever you want. I'm never going to believe that it does because it makes no sense. None of it makes any sense. It's all very disappointing. But you're right. Stubble is right. When you read facts and figures and I it's harder to when you just read that these things happen, it's just a timeline. And since we don't have an account for so much of history, it doesn't become as real to us as if you see, like, everyone knows William Wallace. Maybe Braveheart didn't get the facts just right, but there's enough there that you understand who the character is. And I think now in pop culture, when you say, I'm William Wallace, everybody knows what you're talking about. So that's a kind of a good thing. But I think you're right. I mean, there is how much responsibility do we owe the next generation? That's a very, very good question. Now, I am going to jump over to see what you guys have been saying. Let's see. Where was I? Yeah, well, first of all, I want to get... Willow had some tips that I haven't read that were from a couple of days ago. And I wanted to get to those. Let me get to them, where they were. And here they were. And let's jump into it. Let's see what people are saying, shall we? So this is from a while ago. Senor Ashish sent in a tip and said, all Star Wars films never address why the Empire wanted to rule the galaxy. What was Palpatine, Vader, Ren, Hux, Snoke, etc.? What was their end goal? Natural resource monopoly? Economic control? Pure vanity of being dictators and telling trillions what to do? You know what? I've often said that I think that's a great shortcoming of the Star Wars universe, is we don't know what the villains want. I mean, all the great villains, it's one of the great moments in Die Hard, for instance, is when you realize that they're only stealing $600 million of bearer bonds. And Holly McClane says, well, you're just a common thief. And Hans Gruber's like, I am an exceptional thief, madam. You know, and it was great. You understand what they want. But one of the great, I've always said that, like you read books about, I don't know, Satan coming up from the depths of hell, or in horror novels there's always a big bad and they're vanquished, but you're like, okay, so you want to take over the world, and then what? And they've never defined what the Sith want. I mean, everyone's like, well, they want power. Okay, but what kind of power? If you're already a Sith, why do you need to take over the galaxy? What are you going to do with it? You know, are you going to turn everybody into Sith Lords? And you don't know. And I think that's a very good question, Senor Ashish. I don't know the answer to that. Willow is talking about, she'd asked about depictions like Long Duck Dong in 80s teen films. Willow says, I wasn't offended by Long Duck Dong. I was just trying to say that many older teen films have characters that are stereotypes and defined primarily by one trait. Can you tell me anything about the gay guy in Mean Girls other than he's too gay to function? No. And I've always hated that. That's why I like The Characters and the Perks of Being a Wallflower, which I think is a much better film than people give it credit for. I don't think it gets talked about enough. It's one of my favorite teen films that I saw as an adult that I liked. Willow goes on to say, even the straight white characters are often stereotypes. Jocks, cheerleaders, nerds, stoners, the queen bee, etc. I like that many modern teen movies try and break those conventions. 21 Jump Street made some hilarious commentary on the subject. Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Now let me jump ahead to where you guys were before. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think modern teen films, I mean, Booksmart, I thought, while, you know, the teens in teen movies now seem to be much cooler than they ever were. I mean, even the cool kids were not as cool as the girls in Booksmart. I like Booksmart a lot, and I like seeing the teen films break free of those stereotypes, which I think is great. And also it's a reflection of how far we've come as a culture, I think, which is great. Honest Asian Guy sends in a tip and says, I recently watched Criterion's Blu-ray of Lahane, The Hate, and wow, what a gut punch of a film. Being a person of color, I can totally identify with the three boys in the lead. Despite being made 25 years ago, it's a perfect mirror image of our current climate. Yeah, Lahane is great. You know, Jodie Foster was instrumental in bringing that movie to stateside. I don't know if she's an actual producer on it or something, but that's how come I saw it. Yeah, the Criterion Blu-ray is great. It's a great movie. Yeah, I mean, you know, racism hasn't changed. It hasn't changed, and it hasn't gone anywhere. And I've always found it like, if you're a person that's interested in the world, I don't know how you can be a racist. If you travel and go places and want to meet interesting people, racism quickly falls by the wayside. It really does, because when you start meeting people, when you go to places in other parts of the world, and there's only those people, whoever lives there. Like when I went to South Korea, I felt, I was like, I've said often that I felt I was completely ostracized. I'm like, my God, this is not. I love South Korea. I love Seoul. I love the people I met. I met government officials. I met historians, and I met a lot of great people, and I love them all. But it's not like it was a wild melting pot of diverse people, and I like that because when I went to South Korea, I wanted to go meet South Koreans, so that worked out well. But I felt what it was like to be an outsider, definitely. So that was pretty fun. Wolverine sends in a super chat and says, Deadline report, Mulan going to Disney Plus for $30. Is that true? Wow. Okay, hang on. Let me see. That had to have by the time, but let's see. Wow. Well, Who's the Boss sequel series with Tony Danza and Alyssa Milano is in the works at Sony TV. Okay. Wow. Oh, okay. Let's read this. You are correct. I want to thank you for hipping me to this, Wolverine. So this is really interesting. Mulan is going on Disney Plus and theaters in September. CEO Bob Chapek says decision is a one-off, not a new Windows model. On Disney's third quarter earnings call today, it was announced that Mulan is going to Disney Plus on September 4th. Specifically, Disney will be releasing the film theatrically in certain markets where the studio currently has no announced launch plans for Disney Plus and where theaters are open, i.e. China. The concern with opening the film in some theaters in the world and not others was, of course, piracy related. CEO Bob Chapek said it was important to find new avenues of distribution during the pandemic and that in the US, Canada, New Zealand, and a number of other countries, we will be offering on Disney Plus the epic Mulan on a premiere access beginning September 4th, with the price point being $29.99 in the US. Wow. Wow. Okay. This, by the way, folks, this is incredibly significant because this is the first A-list $200 million film that is being offered on SVOD. Wow. This is the first. This is a watershed moment, so we will carefully watch this and see where it goes. Chapek added during a round of questioning with financial analysts, we're pleased to bring Mulan to a consumer base that's been waiting for it as we've had to move our release date several times. We're looking at Mulan as a one-off as opposed to trying to say that there's a new business model, a new business windowing model. What Disney will be keeping an eye on with Mulan is the uptick in subscribers as well as transactions generated on the service with that new price point. So, exhibition, don't lose your hair yet. Disney isn't planning to take Black Widow out of theaters this November, at least not yet. In regard to pricing Mulan at near $30, Chapek added, as you know, it's fairly expensive to produce for consumers the quality we're known for. Rather than simply rolling the movie onto a free offering, we thought we can test anything when you have your own platform. We're trying to establish a new premiere access window to capture that investment we got in the film. We'll have a chance to learn from this. From our research under a premiere access offering, not only does it get us revenue from our original transactional PVOD, but it's a fairly large stimulus to sign up for Disney+. God knows this decision will be a crushing blow for those U.S. movie theaters planning to reopen and in need of a big title. However, no one knows how the big circuit's reopening is going to look and perform. Also, New York and California have yet to give full clearance for hardtop cinemas to reopen. There was buzz that Disney could go this way with Mulan, but some believe that they were just waiting to see what went on with Tenet. Disney's decision today to take Mulan straight into homes over Labor Day weekend makes the Universal AMC deal window collapse. The Universal AMC deal window collapse deal look like child's play in regards to creating future revenue events out of these finished movies, which are collecting dust on the shelf. No Mulan just means more screens for Tenet as more cinemas come back online. Wow, thank you for hipping me to that, Wolverine. This is a big, big, big deal. If this performs. Now, Here's something I would ask anyone to look out for. If you're a fan of the industry, look out and see how Disney is going to market this, because what they now have to deal with is you've got your installed subscriber base are people that are paying Disney Plus for Disney Plus. Are they going to log in and see that Mulan is available for an additional $30 and pony up the cash? Are they going to do that? Disney, I think, in the next month is going to have to mount a very aggressive marketing campaign for Mulan. If you want to see Mulan, it's $30. It's going to be very interesting to see how they do this and how they deal with their already installed subscriber base, which is above 50 million. I'm very, very curious to see what's going to happen with Mulan. Wow, this is crazy. Kelly Park says, I hope erotic horror can still be made. I just wrote one. Got 7s and better on the blacklist. The premise got a 9. Any advice? Well, if you're writing it, find a filmmaker who wants to make it. I think erotic horror and not Skinamax movies. I'm talking erotic horror where you're not showing obviously simulated sex. I mean, real eroticism. It's hard to do. I'm a man Zalman King, whether you're watching Wild Orchid or whether you're watching my beloved Two Moon Junction or 9.5 Weeks. I mean, that kind of eroticism. It all moved over to Skinamax, but it was just you need a visionary director, and that's what I would look for. The Bunk sends in a tip and says, Rob, I need to know what your favorite Jess Franco film is, and if there are any other favorites of yours from this era of the genre. Wow, there's a lot. I mean, God, my favorite Jess Franco film. There's so many. You know what? I'd have to have a list in front of me because he's directed so many movies that I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But that would be that's a good idea. I mean, I do. I'll tell you, it's not really Euro horror. But I really like this movie that Radley Metzger directed called The Licorice Quartet. It's kind of dreamy, but it's not necessarily horror, but it's really interesting. So, but that's not so much horror. Yeah, I would, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I'll come out with my list of Euro horror. The Bunk. Oh, he's got another one. The Bunk also says, I just watched Emmanuel in America last night, and it is honestly the sleaziest film I've ever seen. Highly recommended. Didn't Jess Franco direct that? Emmanuel in America. There you go, with Laura Gemsher, I think. Gemsher. I love that. I love that that you think it's the sleaziest film you've ever seen. I love that. Gerald sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, I will gladly subscribe to Disney Plus and pay an additional $30 if Disney releases Mulan, the Lesbian Vampire Hunter. So would I. Kelly Park says, that's exactly what I wrote. My script is erotic horror BDSM. Is it doomed? I don't think it's doomed. I think what you need to do is find a director who wants to tackle that material and do a great job with it. Get that stuff on Netflix. Why not? I'm in. Count me in. What's it called? Send me the script. Sean M. sends in a super chat and says, as Bill Murray said, Star Wars, give me those Star Wars. Nothing but Star Wars. Don't let them end. He knew the whole plot somehow. It's true. I love that song. That was a great skit. Nick Parrish is here. What's up, Rob? So I have to say, given the Mulan news today, there's no way I'm paying $30 to watch Mulan at home, especially when I already pay for Disney Plus and I live by myself. I'll just mask up and go see Tenet twice. Well, Nick, that is, in fact, that's what we got to know. We got to know. Is that it? Are people going to go? I don't know the answer to that. Very interesting. But if that's what you're saying, I think a lot of people might feel that way, and we'll certainly find out how that's all going to work. Bunyan Snipe sends in a tip and says, how about trying out a session of the old FASA Star Trek the role-playing game over Zoom? We have a potential science engineering officers, helms people, and of course a captain among our ranks. What do you think? Man, I don't even have any of my FASA role-playing stuff anymore. I think that would be fun to do. As many people know, the fastest Star Trek role-playing game was something that came out in the 80s, and I actually rolled myself 430 characters, crewmen, that I made up. I have that binder of all that the crew somewhere, but I don't have any of my guidebooks. That's actually a great idea. I'd love to do that. Stubble McShave says, I told both you and John a while back that one or more of the bigger studio movies could have foreign theatrical release combined with PVOD. You said it was possible, but John said it would never happen. Well, once again, I am proven to be correct, which is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's what we got. There it is. I mean, well, there it sits. Amazing. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, Rob, whenever you get a chance, you should go on Twitter and check out some of those hilarious memes about Mulan being $30 on Disney+. There's cats, of course, talking about pirating and complaining how they already pay for Disney+. Yep, they're going to need to market that. It's going to backfire unless they market it correctly. We shall see. I don't know. We don't know. We just don't know. Yeah, what a crazy thing. Ian Brown writes in and says, Dear Rob, 2 questions. Have you done too much LDS? I have. Will you join us for Star Trek 4 live stream on the 20th with Dan and the team? Ironically, LDS is a quote from the said film. Regards, Mr. Brown. I'm in, Ian. Count me in. Very much so. I am totally in. By the way, all of a sudden I just started schwitzing, and I don't know why. So count me in on that. Yes, indeed. Hold on. I need to wipe my brow. I don't know why all of a sudden I started to get faint, probably because I haven't eaten anything. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It's once again time for another Willow Yang letter. Greetings, Rob. A few weeks ago, my mom watched $1 Million Baby. She initially didn't like Hilary Swank's Maggie. When I told her that she was going to be the female lead of the movie, she complained that the actress they cast was too ugly. She thought her mouth was too big. I tried explaining that the character was a boxer from an impoverished background, and it would be unbelievable if they'd hired someone who looked like a model to play the role. My mom did eventually warm up to Maggie. However, the turning point for her was probably during Maggie's first match in the welterweight division, where her nose got broken. But she carried on fighting, nevertheless. The character's bravery and determination managed to win my mom over, and she quite enjoyed watching the boxing matches. Then, of course, came the fateful match between Maggie and the welterweight champion. Going into the match, my mom predicted that something was going to go wrong because otherwise, without some kind of struggle or hurdle for the main character to overcome, the story would be just boring. Now, it has been many years since I've watched $1 Million Baby. Of course, I knew what happens at the end of the movie. However, I cannot remember the film being a gut punch the first time that I'd watched it the way it was when I viewed it more recently with my mom. When we arrived at the scene where Maggie makes her final request to Frankie, telling him, I was born 2 pounds, 1.5 ounces. Daddy used to tell me I'd fight my way into this world and I'd fight my way out. That's all I want to do, Frankie. Don't let him keep taking it away from me. Don't let me lie here till I can't hear those people chanting no more. I started tearing up. I looked over at my mom and saw that she was tearing up as well. Up to the point where Frankie administered the adrenaline to Maggie, she kept on expecting her to somehow miraculously recover. After the movie ended, my mom turned to me and asked what the entire point of the story was. Why would someone want to watch such a depressing movie? Well, firstly, I don't think that all movies that deal with depressing subject matter exist for the purpose of making their audience feel bad. Without darkness, there cannot be light. Many inspirational stories will have characters starting out in a darker place and being able to overcome their troubles and move toward the light at the end. Even Holocaust movies like Schindler's List and The Pianist can be inspirational because we see people persevering through some of the worst chapters of human history. And we see the human spirit ultimately triumphing against all odds. Of course, $1 Million Baby isn't the only movie I've seen where the main hero dies. There's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Braveheart, Gladiator, to name but a few examples. In the aforementioned instances, however, the heroes died achieving something. The movies still end on a hopeful, if not triumphant note. At first glance, it's hard to see much hope at the end of $1 Million Baby. Maggie's dead and Frankie is left broken, walking off to an ambiguous fate. I've also tried showing my mom Grave of the Fireflies. About 20 minutes into the movie, she turned it off and refused to watch anymore. Her reasoning was that real life is already difficult enough. There's no need to watch a movie that depresses you. I've not shown her Requiem for a Dream or American History X, two more films that end on rather dour notes. But to me, movies like Grave of the Fireflies, Requiem for a Dream, American History X do have a purpose for being depressing. While I don't think the former two were necessarily meant to preach an anti-war or anti-drug messages per se, they serve to show the devastation that war and drugs have on victims. The latter, on the other hand, is very much a movie that deals with race relations and neo-Nazism, and the ending, as I interpreted it, depicted the cyclic nature of hatred and violence. Going back to Million Dollar Baby, I think the movie has several points. Firstly, narrative-wise, the story sets up a very difficult moral dilemma. The audience is forced to be placed in Frankie's position and consider, perhaps long after the film ended, what they would have done if they had been in that situation. Secondly, there's the quote from Scrap saying, "People die every day, Frankie, mopping floors, washing dishes, and you know what their last thought is? I never got my shot. Because of you, Maggie got her shot. If she dies today, that you know what her last thought would be? I think I did it all right." Even though Maggie's life might have been cut tragically short, she did achieve her dreams of becoming a boxer, cheered on by an adoring crowd of fans. Every person dies, but not every person truly lives. Finally, I do think that there is something alluring about tragic stories. I don't particularly understand psychology and whether watching tragedy really serves to bring about a sense of emotional renewal. As the Greeks have theorized, for me, there is just something impressive about a story that's immersive enough to elicit a strong emotion from me, whether it's one of happiness or one of devastation. Maybe it's a bit masochistic, but like a good comedy that can make me laugh, I enjoy watching a movie that can make me cry. As Inside Out shows, being able to experience the full spectrum of emotions, including sadness, is crucial to our development, to enriching our experience as individuals. Best regards, Willow. What a great letter, Willow. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you totally nailed that. I think in watching tragic stories, we're made to realize that they're not happening to us. So it can be cathartic. We can go through these things and go through them and feel like we've experienced at least somewhat of what it would have been like. And I think it's always helpful. Whether stories, the most tragic of stories, we hopefully have our lives illuminated to be better. At least that's what I would hope. I have no idea why I all of a sudden have broken out in a cold, clammy sweat. I hope that doesn't mean I'm dying. Of course, we're all dying slowly each and every day. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end on Willow Yang's note. I want to thank everybody for writing in. Oh, wait, you know what? I do have some... Hang on, I missed some super chats that I didn't get to. Nick Parrish says, Rob, whenever you get a chance, you should... Oh, I read that. Oh, it's Alexander Wilson. Hello, Alexander, and thanks for supporting the channel this morning in the John Campy Show. Stream Elements wouldn't let me buy a super chat. With the Mulan news, how does this affect U.S. theaters, and what's your favorite Luc Besson movie? And Michael Preston says, did Disney just burn $1 billion? Well, we shall see. It's crazy. This is crazy, crazy, crazy news. Maybe that's why my body is involuntarily reacting to all this crazy news. Stream Elements, that's so strange. I don't know why. But my favorite Luc Besson movie, probably Leon the Professional is my favorite Luc Besson movie. Probably. But, I'm a big fan of his. All the way back to his first feature, Le Dernier Combat, which I have on Blu-ray, which is almost silent, a post-apocalyptic silent movie. I liked Subway. I've liked all of his movies, really. I really have. But, man, I'll tell you, this Mulan news, gentlemen, I don't know. We'll see. This is a great experiment. If it works, if people, people are making memes and are pissed off about Disney Plus, look, they have to understand this movie was going to gross $1 billion. For Disney to do this is a huge deal. If it works and people get what it's supposed to be, it's a huge sea change. It could change Hollywood forever. That's what I would say. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what ends up happening. But wow, this is some craziness. And I knew it was going to happen at some point. I didn't think it was going to happen this soon, but we are going to see what's going to happen. I mean, the idea that they're putting it on Disney Plus, but you have to pay an additional $30 or however they're going to do it, I think is kind of a mistake. They need to take this and make sure people understand this is not Disney Plus. This is something else. I don't know how they're going to spin it, but pretty crazy. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of Robservations episode number 482. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you for supporting the channel, supporting me through Super Chats and tips and all that. And you can write letters to the Burnettwork.net website. You can send me videos to the website if you want, and I will play them. So thank you very much for the ongoing support. And it's pretty great. So I will obviously be back on the John Campea show tomorrow. And I'll be back here on my show, obviously, at either 1 or 2. And then tomorrow night, Whining About Movies with Elizabeth, we are going to be talking about Alan Parker's 1980 film, Fame. Very great film. I love it. So I will end this show by thanking my moderators, Robert Priso, the Richard, Joshua Levesque is here. I want to thank all you guys. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank Greg Smith and my entire moderating staff. Thank you very, very much for everything that you do. And remember, go to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page or the Whining About Movies Facebook page and find the Richard, because he's always doing something interesting there and putting on interesting watch parties. And with that, I will say to everybody, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, have a better day. And I mean that.